This is chapter 9 on blood, lymphatic, and immune systems. So this chapter corresponds with the previous chapter on cardiovascular system. A little background on blood. Most of blood is a liquid called plasma, and most of that is water. Some other parts of blood are your red blood cells, which are your erythrocytes, your platelets where you're clotting, which are thrombocytes. Thrombus, if you remember from the cardiovascular chapter, has to do with a clot. And white blood cells, which are leukocytes. Cyte meaning cell. The lymphatic system is a similar vascular system. It's a circulatory system, very similar to cardiovascular, and kind of the lymph vessels kind of follow the routes of the vessels of the cardiovascular system. One major difference is there's no pump. So in order to get the lymphatic system to circulate lymph, which is its fluid, it can be done through massage or movement. So this lymph and the lymph vessels, it has its own vessels, and lymph nodes are vital in importance to the immune system. Also the spleen, the thymus, tonsils. Okay, the immune system, I'm not going to get into the specifics of how that works, but there are different types of leukocytes that fight for us in our immune system. Okay, combining forms. Adeno meaning gland. We learned that in the endocrine, not to be confused with adrenal gland, but adeno is any gland. So adenitis is inflammation of a gland. Blasto means an embryonic cell, so very beginning undifferentiated cell. It's almost like the generic cell before a cell becomes specifically what it's going to be. Chromo, we learned this in chapter 4, it has to do with color. So if something is hypochromic, it's low in color. Erythro or erythemo is red. We also learned that one. So an erythrocyte is a red cell. Erythema is pertaining to red. Hemo or hemato refers to blood. So hemo or hemato is blood. And like I said, most of blood is this blood plasma. Then secondly, we have erythrocytes, which are our red blood cells, giving it its red color. And lastly, very small amount of leukocytes and platelets. Immuno stands for immune or immunity. Leuco for white, and there are several different types of leukocytes. Okay. Lympho refers to lymph. Lymphoid, if you remember from the suffixes, oid is resembling lymph. Lymphedema would be swelling of lymph. And as you can see in this picture, the lymph vessels are kind of intertwined with our cardiovascular system. Lymphadeno, so you want to be aware of this difference here. This is referring specifically to a lymph gland. Okay? If we were to say lymphangio, we'd be referring to the lymph vessel. So lymphadenopathy is disease of the lymph gland. I just said lymphangio is lymph vessel. So the difference here is lymphangio, lymph vessel, versus hemangio, or is a blood vessel. So lymph vessel, blood vessel. A lymphangioma is a tumor of lymph vessels. Morph refers to shape, structure, form. So morphology is the study of the shape, structure, or form. And we study the shape and the structure or form of blood cells. Nucleo has to do with the nucleus, the brain of the cell. So if something is mononuclear, it has one nucleus. Phago or phago has to do with swallowing or eating. So dysphagia is difficulty swallowing or eating. A phagocyte is a cell that swallows. I think of like Pac-Man. So if this is the bad guy, the pathogen, which is pathos, gen, means origin of disease, or in layman's term, germ. And this is a phagocyte. The phagocyte engulfs, envelops, swallows the pathogen, brings it into its own body, and breaks it down. That's how it kills it. Spleno with one E is referring to the spleen. Thymus. Thymo is for this, we learned this in the endocrine chapter. It's not the thyroid, which is located up here. It's the thymus, which is located in the center of the chest. And when an infant or child is young, that's very large. It gets very, very small as you get older. So thymopathy is disease of the thymus. Thymectomy is removal of the thymus. Okay, suffixes and prefixes. You've got blast, and I mentioned that that was the generic, the undifferentiated cell. So if you see here, we've got a stem cell, which is the most generic cell, okay? And it's hematopoietic, which means it forms blood. So if we have a blood-forming stem cell, it's going to be some kind of blood cell. We just don't know what yet. And then we have a bunch of these blasts, blast. And that's the embryonic, that's the next stage, blast. And continuing until they differentiate until our specific eosinophil, basophil types of leukocytes, types of erythrocyte, or thrombocyte. So a hematocytoblast is an embryonic cell of blood cells. A myoblast is an embryonic cell of muscles, and a lymphoblast is an embryonic cell that's going to become a lymph cell. Hemoglobin, globin, is protein. So we know hemo is blood, so hemoglobin is literally blood protein. Penia is decrease or deficiency. So leukocytopenia, penia means decrease, deficiency, be decrease or deficiency of white cells. Okay. Phil is love or attraction for. The city of Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love. That's what it's named for. So when cells are attracted, a neutrophil, it means that it loves that kind of cell. It's an attraction for. It's a suffix for when cells are attracted to one another. Okay, phylaxis is protection. So anaphylaxis is literally without protection, when the body kind of attacks itself. Okay. Cytophylaxis is cell or protection of cells. Okay. Poiesis, I mentioned this earlier with the hematopoiesis. So poiesis takes something from a stem cell level to a specific level, okay? And in this case, in this chapter, hemopoiesis, hematopoiesis, either way is okay, is the process of forming mature blood cells, okay? Be careful here though, because forming and production sounds awfully like Genesis, okay? So when we're referring to the maturation process, or maturing process, we're really talking about poiesis. Okay? Stasis, think of stay still, stasis, is means standing still. So hemostasis or homeostasis, well, let's go back. Hemostasis refers to blood standing still. And we need the blood to stand still in order for a clot to form. That's why we hold pressure on a wound so that hemostasis can occur. Homeostasis means standing still the same, which is a convoluted way of saying internal balance in the body. Okay, some vocabulary. Anaphylaxis literally means no protection, but that's an extreme life-threatening response to an allergen. This doesn't mean that, your stomach gets upset because you had ice cream. This is extreme life-threatening allergy. An anticoagulant prevents clotting. Okay? So it's a drug that makes clotting time longer. So if you're holding pressure on a wound, trying to achieve hemostasis, it's going to take longer because this person is on what we call like a blood thinner. And it doesn't literally thin the blood. What it does is it increases clotting time. Abbreviations. ASA is a fancy word for aspirin. The actual, let's see if I can type it here. The actual abbreviation is acetyl salicylic. Okay, acetylsalicylic acid is what ASA stands for, but common term would be aspirin. BP or B/P is blood pressure. CPR, cardiopulmonary lungs resuscitation. Cardiovascular pulmonary resuscitation. DVT, we talked about this with a clot. This referring to a clot in the deep veins of the lower legs, typically. I'll spell it out for you right here, if it'll let me. Deep vein thrombosis, DVT. Okay. HCT is hematocrit. That is a lab value. It's a percentage of the blood, but it's a lab value. HDL is also a lab value. HDL refers to the quote-unquote good cholesterol. It's high-density lipoprotein is what it stands for. High-density lipoprotein, or the good cholesterol. So you want to have more of that. In contrast, the LDL is the low-density lipoprotein, or the bad cholesterol, that you want to have less number of. HGB, so be careful here, HGB, so in order, hemoglobin, is another lab value, usually goes along with hematocrit. We call it an H&H. That's measuring, it's a measurement for blood. HTN stands for hypertension. Let's take this N. HTN, or high blood pressure. Hypertension or high blood pressure. And MI stands for myocardial. So if you didn't know what myocardial meant, you could figure it out by pertaining to muscle of the heart. Okay, so we're talking about the heart muscle. Infarction means attack or occlusion, tissue death. So a heart attack is a myocardial infarction. O2 is oxygen. P, little p, big H, is the symbol for the degree of acid or alkaline something is. And in the body, blood, since we're talking about blood, should be between 7.35 and 7.45 pH. Okay, your stomach acid is a 2, to give you an idea. So stomach acid is very acidic, and the scale goes from 0 to 10. Okay. RBCs are red blood cells, RBC, red blood cell, or erythrocyte. R/O is rule out. So a lot of times we'll say, you'll see in a chart, you'll see something like chest pain, rule out MI. What they're saying is this person has chest pain. We want to rule out or find out if it is a myocardial infarction, or is it just indigestion. Okay. WBCs or white blood cells, also known as leukocytes. And here we are at our practice. Okay, I just want to make sure real quick with this. I'm going to fly through this real quick. I'm trying to make sure that there isn't any vocabulary words at the end. It's a lot of practice here. Good. Oh, let's do this. This is fantastic practice. Okay, so in your career, you will probably have to decipher a medical note. So let's try that. So you can go ahead and figure out what anemia is. Anemia, blood condition of without, right? So I want you to imagine this person, 46-year-old African-American man reports a history of anemia. So he doesn't have without blood, but he may have low blood counts. His HGB or hemoglobin was 6 on admissions, no sign of leukocytopenia. So leukocytopenia is going to be decrease or deficiency of white cells or hemorrhage. And we know Raj is bursting forth. So bursting forth of blood, hemorrhage. He states that he has not had a splenectomy or removal of his spleen. He explains that his pain is in his left upper quadrant of his abdomen. Denies having chills or feeling febrile, which means feverish. Patient was admitted today and received morphine for analgesia. Ooh, that one came back. That's without feeling, right? Or painkiller. Antiemetic is anti-nausea or vomiting. The immunologist or specialist in the study of the immune system visited with the patient today and felt there was no reason for concern. Patient is scheduled for discharge, and I suppose you could have put D/C today. That's what discharge is. All right, well, excellent. You've done your first note. That completes chapter 9.